So we're going to go over Bedmas, and it's integers and fractions. It's actually mostly fraction, but the rules for fractions apply to our integers also. Okay?
Right.
So with Bedmas, we look at things in brackets. So if we look at brackets, I could kind of turn these fractions into decimals, but maybe my teacher tells me they want you to evaluate everything as a fraction, so we're not going to do that. We're going to leave everything as a fraction, so there's nothing to evaluate in brackets. We don't have any exponents. And then the next step is division or multiplication. Okay, so as we go through, our first operation is addition. Okay, subtraction. If there's two brackets beside each other, I don't know if they've talked about this, but this means multiplication. Right? Draw a little dot or two brackets. Okay, and then division. Because this multiplication is first, we're going to focus on the multiplication of these two fractions. So that's the very first thing we're going to do. So I'll kind of highlight it as we go through. Okay. So our very first step will be to evaluate that. So we just bring down everything else. We have 3 over 4, that hasn't changed, plus 7 over 2, that hasn't changed. Now, it'll actually be easiest if we think of this as negative 5 over 3. Okay, so we're going to think of this as negative 5 over 3, and the negative can be applied to either the top or the bottom of the fraction, not both. Okay, and the reason being for that is, if you guys have talked about when multiplying, a positive times a positive is a positive, a negative times a negative is a positive, and then a positive times a negative is a negative. I don't know if they've talked about that when you're multiplying stuff. Yeah, those rules are the exact same for division, and a fraction is really just a division question. It says 5 over 3. So if I put a negative here and this is a positive, that means it's going to be a negative. And that makes sense because we said this was a negative. If I do the opposite and make this a positive and this a negative, positive and negative, still gives me a negative. It checks out. But if I put the negative on both the top and the bottom, well, negative times a negative is a positive. And that's not the case here because this is a negative. It's not a positive value. Okay, so it doesn't matter top or bottom. Just kind of choose one. So we're going to multiply. When we multiply fractions, we multiply the top values, so the numerators by each other, and the denominators by each other. And like I said, we're going to apply this negative somewhere, so let's apply the negative to the top. Think of it as it's negative 5. Okay? Right. So negative 5 times 1 is going to give us negative 5. Okay, so we have kind of write it like negative 5 over 3 times 2 is 6. Okay, so negative 5 over 6. That's how we're going to write this value. That is all simplified into negative 5 over 6. It's still divided by 2. So because there's division here, that's going to be our next step. Okay, according to Bedmas, we have addition, we have subtraction, we have division. So we'll work with these two values next. Again, we're going to keep that. Still think of it like it's a negative 5 over 6 divided by 2. When I'm dividing, if I'm dividing fractions, it'll work easiest if I make everything a fraction. Okay, so I can make this 2 a fraction by putting it over the number 1. Okay, 2 divided by 1 is still 2, so everything works out fine. Okay, and then there's rules when we're dividing fractions. They tell you to like invert and multiply. Okay. The idea is we're going to flip the second fraction, and we're going to turn this into a multiplication question instead. Okay, so we don't ever really have to divide a fraction. We just work with some multiplication. So we bring down the other two. We haven't changed anything there. 3 over 4 plus 7 over 2. Okay, and then we're dividing a fraction. So we have negative 5 over 6. I'm going to keep the negative on top there. And then now it becomes multiplication, and we flip this fraction. 1 over 2. Okay? And like we stated before, when multiplying, we do top by the top, bottom by the bottom. So negative 5 times 1 is still going to be negative 5. Okay? I'm still going to write these two. We haven't changed anything. 3 over 4, 7 over 2. And this becomes negative 5 over, and 6 times 2 is 12. There we go. And now what we're left with is just the operations of addition and subtraction. So the first part here, this was tough. It was tough to understand. We dealt with the multiplication, and then we dealt with the division. And we had to know these addition and subtraction rules, or sorry, multiplication and division rules. Okay. Now we're adding and subtracting fractions. In order to do that, we need our denominators to be the exact same. Okay. 12 is a common multiple of both of these. So we're going to multiply the top of the fraction and the bottom of the fraction by the same value to get 12. So to get 4 to become 12, we need to multiply by 3. Good. So we do the top and the bottom of the fraction. To get 2 to become 12, we have to multiply by 6.
6.
So we do that to the top and the bottom of the fraction. So now we're left with 9 over 12 plus 42 over 12 minus 5 over 12. Well, now that everything's over 12, my answer is going to be over 12. Okay? And now it's just as simple. We have to 9 plus 42 minus 5. And that is going to be 46. It should be. Okay? So we end up with 46 over 12. And they might tell you to make it a mixed fraction or turn this into a decimal. It's going to be like 3.8, maybe, something like that, something around there. But this is an acceptable answer as a fraction, 46 over 12. That works out fine. Okay? And that kind of covers our multiplication and division rules for integers also. And we're while working with a pretty tough fraction question. Okay?